Last week we began this season of Advent with this proclamation of cosmic signs that seem to be so very eventful, even suggesting the end of the world. And yet we saw that in the midst of all that, Christ was coming. The message was very clear as we began this season. Despite the many aspects of turmoil and world-shattering events that happen in our lives, that's precisely when Christ comes. He comes in ways to save us when we admit that we cannot save ourselves. And today we see in this second Sunday of Advent an opportunity to deepen our faith in this coming Lord into our lives. And we see that in the particular person of John the Baptist. Notice that he's an individual who is very rough. We're told in the scriptures he wore clothes of camel skin with a leather belt around his waist, and he fed himself on grasshoppers and honey. He's a very rough character who lives in the margins of society. He's in the desert. He's an unimportant figure compared to people like Herod and Tiberius Caesar and Philip and all those that are named at the beginning of the gospel today. He's a big nobody. And yet it is precisely to him that the word of God comes, to proclaim and prepare the way of the Lord. All of that, it seems to me, suggests that there are rough moments in our lives where maybe we feel ostracized and at the edge, where people ignore us, or maybe our lives seem to have fallen apart and nobody pays attention to us. And it's that moment that the Lord calls us to prepare the way of His Son into our lives so that others may know Christ Himself. I always like to share with young people a story of someone who, at their age, overcame their difficulty and was shunned and yet made something out of it. There was a young man named Scott who was friends with a group of 7th or 8th graders. They palled around all the time. And then when they went all to high school together, they tried out for the freshman basketball team. Everybody made the team except Scott. And all of a sudden, he was dropped as her friend. He was no longer really part of the group. And so he sat home sulking. His mother then said to him, "No, you're going to do something else here with your life. You're not going to just sit here and sulk. Why don't you find out the kids who have been ignored and maybe rejected as the in-group and invite them over. And together, maybe you can make new friends." And he did. And it was at that moment in which he allowed himself to dig out of that moment of depression and disappointment and really become friends in a new way with other people, those who weren't so popular. I think that is a story so revealing of all of our lives. It's a challenge in which we are at a low point in life, in which we have setbacks, and it's there that the Word of God comes to us in our lives to maybe look for another way in which we can do good, and maybe even prepare for the coming of Christ in this season. So maybe as we look upon those moments in our lives, we can reach out to people who are homeless, those who are in nursing homes that we haven't visited, giving a call to someone that we've been alienated with and seek or ask for forgiveness or give it in return. There are moments in which we can be like John the Baptist, coming out of the desert of our disappointment and preparing the way of the Lord in the world by our kindness, by our sensitivity, our compassion that we show to those who are in need, because we ourselves have been there. That, I think, is the call of the Word of God for each one of us as we continue moving towards the great feast of Christ's birth. We should each be John the Baptist, giving witness in the world, not looking only at our defeats and disappointments, but looking at an opportunity in which we can prepare the way of the Lord through our acts of kindness, by smoothing the rough roads that have been there plaguing our relationships with others, by lowering the mountains of pride in our hearts that don't allow us to forgive, by also making sure that those valleys are filled in, especially valleys of disappointment. So let us continue on this journey in this season of Advent to prepare the way of the Lord, not as Scott did, sulking in his disappointment, but hearing the word of God like he heard his mother call him, to look for something more in his life, and in that way truly be those who prepare the way of the Lord.